Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I'm starting a little bit earlier than I do. Usually I start at basically like second one of when the stream is promised to start, but because of technical issues with the last couple of streams, I'm trying to check if everything works. I don't know if it's like, if it was an OBS issue or something. Like, I'm just seeing if it works fine. Yeah, it took a while to load for some reason on YouTube, but it seems to be working. I hate that it sometimes just cannot tell what is, like, what issue is which. Let me just briefly correct this here. Okay. Yeah, I hope it works now. Let me just briefly check again. For some reason, like, live streams now take like super long to load on the YouTube app. There should be a delay, that's fine, but the quality is the quality at least okay? Yeah, okay, the quality is all right. Streaming from a different network today, so hopefully that fixes it. The OBS settings are all exactly the same as I've had for quite a while, so I just really wanted to make sure that it works. It's so weird sometimes. Yeah, but the quality seems to be all right. Let me just briefly check if the audio is there. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. I can hear myself, which is a good sign. Unless it's happening without a live stream, then it's not so good. Yeah, thank God. So that way I can monitor everything and stuff like that. I apologize for the very unannounced stream. I know I usually I promised I would announce them a little bit faster than and this one turned out to be one of the worst times where I announced it like half an hour before it. I apologize for that, but hopefully as we go through the stream, other people will join us. I know this channel is quickly becoming a VOD channel in the sense that no matter whether I post a regular video or a live stream, it gets watched afterwards instead of live. Not that I mind that. I do enjoy our conversations and live chat and things like that, but I just really want to make sure that people who watch this channel know that this is a channel that offers live streams, and it will do so at least until the end of this year, and at that point I might reconsider it. If really nobody watches me live, then I might do a little bit more edited content and stuff like that. But I really like interacting with you guys live. I really like getting your input, your suggestions. I like learning what you obviously know. I like relying on you. If I'm saying something wrong, to correct me, or if I don't know something, I can just ask you. Yeah, this is not going to be a super long video because I have something planned right afterwards. However, I'm really interested in this one. This is MaxTag's. I should give it a like. I have no idea why it says it has no likes. This is MaxTag's most recent video on the M3 Max MacBook Pro. They made some great comparisons between it and the M1 Max, the M2 Max. Obviously, as you guys know, I am the owner of a 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro, a fully configured one with a 32-core GPU. So for me, that's actually pretty relevant. Now, they are testing 16-inch models here, but you can always expect some downgrades on the 14-inch when it comes a little bit to sustained performance. The overall like heating apparatus, one might say, is pretty much the same, but with a much larger body. The 16-inch can just leverage its larger chassis and its larger fans. The cooling itself, when it comes to the amount of copper and aluminum used on top, is identical as far as I know. Yeah, and of course course, there's the battery life impact, where you go from a 72 watt hour battery to a 99.9 watt hour battery on the 16-inch model. So that's quite beneficial, obviously, when you also want to find out just how efficient is a processor. If, for example, if it still ends up consuming a lot of power, because obviously it delivers a ton of performance, well, then it's obviously really good to still have the largest possible battery. That's but I went to the Apple store yesterday and I checked out their 16-inch space black M3 MacBook Pros, and I just found 16 inches too large in comparison to like how much I've gotten used to my 14-inch version. I just really couldn't justify like changing like my backpacks, all my desktop arrangement, my desk arrangements, and how and what I place where with a 16-inch model. That would change substantially. Currently, I don't rely on any like external battery packs or anything. Like the battery life of my MacBook Pro is quite enough for me, and for anything that would require substantially more battery life, it's not like the 16-inch model would suddenly give me double the battery life, right? For that, I would still need to carry around a power bank, or of course the power brick, which is what I do currently. So I'm currently very satisfied with my M1 Max MacBook Pro. I know that Vadim from Max Tech is an M1 Max MacBook Pro owner, and he had considered upgrading to the M3 Max model. So I'm actually really curious what his final conclusion will be. I watched a little bit of that video, but not fully, so I'm quite curious about the full-on results as we go into the details. As always, please let me know in the comments if the quality is working all right for you. I know it can be sometimes hit or miss, where I had to rearrange obviously my desk now that I'm back home for this week. And of course, please let me know if there are any audio quality issues, if anything happens because of my internet connection. I know I say that all the time, but I am a little paranoid because some of my previous streams have had issues pretty much out of nowhere, and obviously I cherish your experience very much. I hope that you always enjoy what I'm providing here. Josephat, you're pretty much always here. That's so much appreciated, man. An absolute OG on this channel at this point. I think you joined around 1,000 or 2,000 subscribers. We are now at 56.5 thousand subscribers, so an absolutely amazing journey. Just a little over a week ago, we were at 10,000. So the M3 Max discussions, obviously all the MacBooks, the iPads, all that stuff have contributed to this amazing channel growth. I hope it will continue even now that the discussion of obviously the new Macs is starting to die down, but maybe we'll get some new rumors about iPad soon. My last video about iPad rumors did quite well. Thank you, Josephat, on the congrats. And by the way, this is also my stream about, not necessarily about, but basically post my birthday. I've promised you guys that I would stream on my birthday on the 12th of November. However, I wasn't able to do so, which is also the reason why I'm paranoid today, because I then had some bizarre either OBS or YouTube issues in general. So I turned 27, was an amazing gift to be hitting like, I don't even remember what subscriber count I hit that day, because it has grown so quickly even in the last 3 days. I think I hit like around 35,000 or something like that, or maybe it was already closer to 40k. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to ramble on just how grateful I am to all of you guys. If you are watching this and you haven't yet subscribed and you're enjoying this channel, please consider subscribing. Please consider liking, sharing it out to your friends, family members. Annoy them with a mark tag stuff until they're all subscribed. And if you're watching this and you're enjoying it so much that you want to support this channel directly, you can either find the Patreon link, my Patreon link of course, in the description of this channel, or you can send me directly here as we are live a super chat or a super sticker. That is very much appreciated. So let's start. I don't think there's that much more that I can do to ramp you guys up. I'm very excited, obviously, to get all the details, and let's experience together.
Is the new M3 MacBook Pro worth it over the M2 Max and even the M1 Max MacBook Pro? Well, in this video, I'm gonna run a bunch of real-world tests and comparisons, including SSD speed, CPU benchmarks, GPU benchmarks, video editing, photo editing.
Yeah, by the way, it's not like there are some things here to consider, like for example, Final Cut Pro still hasn't gotten its promised update that is most likely going to be like taking advantage of dynamic caching and probably other improvements on the M3 generation. Apple specifically promised some performance improvements. Blender is still in alpha or beta phase depending on which Blender version we are talking about, and that is obviously important when we are talking about any kind of Blender version that currently supports Metal RT, so hardware accelerated ray tracing on Apple Silicon. Cinebench obviously is new, so don't forget that it's not comparable results to like Cinebench 23 and obviously older versions. Logic Pro, it's an interesting test the way MaxTech does it. They really try to like basically hammer home the point of how many tracks a new chip can handle. That is depending on RAM, on caching, on cache, on the amount of cores. We got a new Logic version, so if it's supposed to take advantage of dynamic caching, then it probably already does, but I cannot guarantee it. And the other tests, I think, are pretty much self-explanatory.
Xcode programming, Logic Pro music production, and so much more. And with that, we're also going to be testing the thermal throttling, the fan noise, and of course the battery life, because both of these...
That's actually really good. I should also say that this kind of battery life test is actually pretty interesting, and I'm very glad that somebody is doing it, because this is workflow battery life, right? If a task gets done twice as fast because a new chip is that fast, right? Well, then the battery life should be taking into account that you are that much faster with your task. It's not like Word, right, where you are basically limited by your ability to type quickly or to come up with the needed results. If a task is heavily dependent on processor speed and the processor gets actually done a lot quicker, well, then battery life should take that into consideration. That's still, we should also account for apps like Final Cut, for example. They will take up a fixed amount of time as you just sit there and think about what you move around and how. However, it's very difficult to test that in a consistent way. It obviously varies from project to project. And then there's also the discrepancy of sometimes work gets done on the processor before that, right? Final Cut, I know, does a lot of like pre-processing in between, and then of course there's also like intermediate steps that take up a lot of performance potentially, like color correction if you want to apply it right away so you see the real results. So that's obviously, it's a highly nuanced conversation, but I really like that they will just run the benchmarks, run the tests, and then tell us by how much the battery has gone down. It's not obviously going to be representative of like your web browsing experience, your video watching experience. I still haven't found that kind of comprehensive testing for the M3 Max version. Mostly what I found is pretty inconclusive. Sometimes it like pretty much matches the previous Max version. Sometimes it comes a little below because of its like 12 performance cores and things like that. But obviously it will vary from test to test, and as people test on like devices that they actually use, so there might be some background task that they have forgotten to account for. And of course the new display is brighter than before, so setting those displays to the exact same brightness might be a little complicated. Again, a lot of nuance. I'm just trying to say that whenever I criticize people, I am aware aware of those nuances. I'm not expecting perfection, but sometimes, as for example, when we talked about Super Steph's video, and like he tested out stuff where he didn't tell us that he like set, for example, the night mode shots for the same amount of time for exposure. That's obviously very important information, because if one night mode photo was taken with 1 second of exposure but the other had 3 seconds, and the reason why Super Steph did it that way is because that was the automatic way the phone did it. Well, that's all fine and good, but we still have those options to obviously correct that by ourselves. So in that case, I just highly encourage you to really understand the tests that are happening. And this is, for example, why I actually feel somewhat confident in doing these reaction videos, because I'm one of the few, as I find, unfortunately, like Apple focused channels that also can like uses a lot of watches, at least a lot of like PC hardware content, a lot of gaming content. I watch like how reviews get done on Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed, Digital Foundry, and I try to incorporate that into my Mac content, and obviously my other Apple content as well. This is, for example, why for years I've been a huge fan of Fanatec, but unfortunately with all the downsizing there, they just cannot provide all the content that I wish that they would. And I try to add a little bit of my more nuanced perspective on top of other Apple-specific content. This is nothing against Greg's Gadgets, Luke Miami, or Max Tech, who I obviously react to the most. They do a fantastic job. If they didn't, like, for example, Geekervan, I wouldn't be reacting to them. But I just wanted to point that out, that my perspective can be a little more different in that regard, and this is why I try to do this. I know that a lot of my viewers are like Android users or PC users. And I always have been really, really clear on this channel that while it's an Apple-centric channel, it is not an Apple-exclusive channel, nor is it an Apple bootlicker channel, right? I've been plenty of critical and across many decisions that Apple makes, across pricing, across device differentiation inside the lineup. However, I've also been more nuanced on certain discussions where some in the Apple community just love to clench their pearls, basically. Like, for example, the size of the iPad lineup. I've said time and time again that my complaints with the iPad lineup come down to specific pricing, storage choices, display differentiations, Apple Pencil implementation, especially on the iPad 10th gen. But my complaints are not with the size of the iPad lineup. What am I hurt by the fact that Apple gives me more options? I am most likely to get the Pro option anyway. So everything that exists below is just an option for me to, for example, analyze those devices, but also to give out, for example, gifts to people that don't need the Pro version or something like that. So again, not trying to blow my own horn here, just trying to explain why I'm doing the content that I'm doing. I'm trying to also learn with you guys, so if I'm making any mistakes, please feel free to correct me. Let's continue.
Are charged up to 100%, and I'm going to unplug them for this testing. Now, first of all, I want to mention that this new space black color is absolutely beautiful.
It's gorgeous. I've seen it in the Apple Store yesterday. It's actually hard to take a picture of it. I've tried even with like Pro Raw and everything. It's really hard to capture just how black it is, actually. That being said, it's obviously still more of a dark gray. But yeah, it's not like how black you can sometimes get plastic, and it's absolutely magical in its fingerprint avoidance, basically. I pretty much tend to sweat very easily, so I've like really pressed on. I'd forgotten to take a picture because that was the moment where my order arrived at the Apple Store. I had ordered like a new clear case for my iPhone 15 Pro Max, but yeah, it was really cool that you actually couldn't really see those fingerprints even in the direct light of the Apple Store. That was quite cool.
and it almost got me to upgrade to the new M3 Max.
It will not get me to upgrade, but I understand.
But we're gonna see if the testing in this video compared to my old M1 Max, which I redid all the testing on, will get me to upgrade. But you know what? Let's start off with a teardown comparison to see if the thermal block actually got bigger in this new M3 Max model. And moment of truth, oh, whoa, look at that. That's something new. Check this out. The new M3 Max has these little, oh, it's actually rubber. These rubber pads, and it seems like that's probably so that if you kind of put pressure on the back of the MacBook case, so it doesn't actually make contact, so it's stopping the contact, which is very interesting. But other than that, the size of the thermal block is exactly the same compared to the M2 Max, which is interesting because
as I've said, I've watched some of it before. I have not gotten to exact thermal testing in the video. I would guess that the fans spin up faster, and I don't actually know if they have a higher peak basically frequency, but I kind of would assume that they more easily reach their peak sound and what is it called? Actually, I should have that. The fan speed, basically. Yeah, it's. I don't know why I blacked out on that one.
Apple made the one on the M3 Pro chip much larger, but not on this one. Which is weird because this is the one that actually got a lot better in terms of having 12 performance cores, 50% more than on the M2 Max. Now, other than that, everything basically looks the same. We still have.
By the way, I'm not trying to excuse the fact that this device would potentially run either hotter or just louder because of the fan speed, especially given that the Max versions have effectively gotten a price increase. Granted, they now also come with more default storage, so it's a little bit harder to compare, but yeah, definitely, if you want to get the creme de la creme, the best of the best, you are paying more this time around. You're definitely getting a lot in return. It's not like I'm trying to deny that, but there definitely is some element here that the M3 Max does deserve a little bit better cooling. Makes me actually worry a little about the 14-inch MacBook Pro, because that one obviously can rely far less on its larger fans because it has smaller fans.
Have 8 NAND slots for the storage chips, with 4 of them being filled. If you get bigger configurations, then you'll have more of them filled. But the same as the M2 Max. The first thing we're going to start off with is the SSD speed with Blackmagic Disk Speed Test. All right, look at that. It looks like the write speed so far is actually faster, 6271 compared to 5600.
Oh, okay. Well, I would point out that obviously speed also increases from the base 512 gigabytes. At least it did so on the M1 Max and M2 Max. So I know the 1 terabyte version, for example, that I have pretty much always reaches above 6,000. I know that 2 terabytes get closer to 7,000, but then you get no further benefits once you get to 4 or 8 terabyte configurations. Definitely, though, nice that in general Apple is like leveraging their NAND modules better this year around. I don't know if they're specifically faster or Apple just has done some tuning. It's not like they gave them more bandwidth in general from the PCIe lanes, because obviously that would be a rather small change for that kind of adjustment, but yeah, still nice that you get like 10% more every year. That's not bad.
Old one, so it looks like they are using slightly faster SSDs. The read speed is just about the same, 5047.
Yeah, read speeds are pretty much all maxing out somewhere around here once we are talking about PCIe 4 storage, at least on Apple's devices. It should also say that it just varies from device to device that you get. It's basically like chip lottery a little bit in that regard, like silicon lottery. Sometimes you get storage that is 2-3% faster. You really cannot do much about it, right? If you take like the average of the M2 Max, then it's pretty much all about it's pretty much error rate pretty low still.
120. So this is really good so far. And getting straight into performance with Geekbench, I do want to mention that this M3 Max has the fully upgraded chip, which has the 40-core GPU and the 16-core CPU, which means that you're forced into getting 48 gigabytes of RAM. That's why we have that, compared to 32 gigs on the M2 Max, which came standard with the fully unbinned version. So let's go ahead and start the CPU.
Yeah, it also reflects a little in like the peak bandwidth, right? The M1 Max, the M2 Max always had only 400 gigabyte per second memory bandwidth, right? There was no way to get less or more for that regard. And the M3 Max comes in its binned version with the 30 GPU cores with only 300 gigabytes per second. That's a little unfortunate. However, most testing have shown that it's actually pretty much in line with what the chip actually needs. So you are not getting shafted too hard, because obviously between 30 and 40 cores, you would be pretty much fine with 300 gigabytes per second for one and 400 for the other. Not saying that I approve of that directly, especially given the price increase that I also mentioned for the M3 Max versus the M2 Max. However, it is a little understandable given that 3 nanometer really is very expensive right now. So just wanted to give that bit of nuance. It's not where I have my biggest criticisms with Apple.
Test, and I do want to mention this goes up to 4.05 gigahertz compared to 3.67, but let's see if it actually hits that in here. Oh, look at that, 4.05. It's actually hitting it on the P-core usage. Interestingly, both the M3 and the M3 Pro never hit 4.05. Even though it said it technically can, I think.
Yeah, this almost makes me wonder if there's like a default like clock speed increase on the M3 Max where it's more likely to reach its peak frequency single core. I have no idea, because obviously Geekbench just give us one peak frequency rating. That one is the same between M3, M3 Pro and M3 Max. That's about 4.05, 4.07 gigahertz. I cannot give you that much more nuance than that. I think we would need to really ask an Apple engineer. We've also seen like some tests perform really differently in that regard. Like some only give you 3.8, some give you full 4 gigahertz. So yeah, a little test depending, and probably a difference also between the Max chips and the non-Max chips.
I think the highest was 3.78 on the M3 Pro chip, but this M3 Max is finally hitting it. And interestingly, the M2 Max is only going up to 3.41 gigahertz. That's a huge difference. And it looks like for single core, the new M3 Max is 17.5% faster than the M2 Max, which is actually really impressive. And the crazy thing is I was watching this chart and this thing spiked up to 49 watts of usage, whereas the M2 Max...
Yeah, peak usage, by the way, I just wouldn't bother too much about that. It really is not going to impact your battery life or anything if we are talking about like single core performance or anything. In multi-core, yeah, M3 Max with its far bigger amount of cores, obviously, will draw more power, though that will also help it get through certain tasks much faster. So yeah, there is a power increase, but the overall efficiency is still up gen to gen.
Max at about 35, so a lot more power usage for just one of those tests. And holy smokes.
But you also saw, by the way, here, if we go just back a little, right? It's not like it stayed at 50 watts, right? That was pretty much by the end point. Now here we are looking at 25-ish. And here we are looking at 30, 37-ish. I guess one could say for like... It's also like a very different behavior throughout the test. So... I really wouldn't interpret too much into this. It's also, it like goes from testing single core, which I guess is that like continuous line, to then testing multi-core, but then somehow does not fully leverage like every core all the time, right? Otherwise the peak would like stay consistent for at least a little while. So yeah, it's not a perfect way to test the CPU. I guess in that case, Cinebench, with its very defined workflow, and with your ability to also like monitor it for a longer period of time, is a little better, though obviously the Geekbench results over the years have been pretty good and pretty representative of what you should expect from your device. Now a lot of people will like complain about like, oh, 20% more, do I feel that, do I not feel that? It just comes down to how much your device does these days. Like you're taking high resolution images. Now on the 15 Pro Max, you're working with 24 megapixels most of the time instead of 12. And then even when you watch it, right, your CPU has to handle loading that in. Then when you're doing something like subject lift, then you have to rely on the neural engine. Now the neural engine has to work from an image with far more pixels. So I just really highly encourage you to understand that it's a synergy of all those different improvements between CPU, GPU, neural engine. Like I always bring that up because it's funny, because people were like complaining when like A12 devices got like new weather animations and stuff like that, but previous processors did not, right? And people were like, well, we had weather animations back in like iOS 7, what's the deal here? And as it turned out, that the exact animation that you get is actually highly variable, and it's determined through, at least partially, through the neural engine. So that allows Apple to put that task on a pretty powerful neural engine and get a very high efficiency from the processor while still doing something beautiful. Now obviously that kind of task could run with like the GPU of the A11 or even the A10, or let's be honest, even the A9 or something like that. But it most likely would consume a lot more energy, and it would also synergize far more poorly with all the other components, right? If suddenly your GPU has to like run a lot higher because you open the weather app, well, that just doesn't jive with all the other tasks your device has to do at any given moment. So Apple just gave that to the A12 devices. Now, could they have backported that functionality and made it fully optional for A11, A10 devices? Sure, they could, but that's not how Apple operates, and that's quite honestly how I never expect Apple to operate. Like, Apple could give us like 10 years of devices where you only get like 10% performance increases each year, and I still don't expect that Apple would give us like double or triple suddenly the long-term software support with the excuse, oh, it's now much easier to backport it to older devices because those devices are negligibly slower than the new ones, right? Apple takes into account every single improvement on the SoC. They take into account all the architectural changes that also make like software optimization a lot easier. Now, that isn't to say that Apple doesn't like still take care of older devices. Obviously, their support for older devices is still absolutely unmatched. We expect Samsung in like 6-7 years catch up with what Apple is currently offering, right? That being said, I don't want to be a downer here on like on all the critics, because I know other critics will disagree with me on that point. They will say like, no, it's all anti-consumer. Look at how Linux works on like 25-year-old hardware. My answer to that is, if you want that experience, you go to Linux. Part of Apple is saying no to something, and that sometimes means saying that certain devices are now obsolete, meaning that they won't get software updates, be it feature releases or even security fixes at some point. And yes, that point should like be pushed as far as it can, right? 10, maybe even 12 years, but never expect Apple to be quite the same as Windows especially not like an open operating system like Linux. This is actually meaningful competition. I know a lot of people want to establish standards, right? Like, oh, fully open operating system. Everything should be fully open, right? Everything should like work on the same APIs, right? Vulkan has only advantages, right? Why does Metal even exist? But then you see what Apple actually does with that, and you kind of understand why they, in certain ways, they are absolutely at the forefront of standards, right? For example, years and years ago, Apple made WebKit an open standard, and that became the basis for what we now know as Chromium. Apple made OpenCL a standard. They made their coding language Swift an open standard, and everything all surrounding that, or open source, I should say. But don't expect that to happen for like the actual like firmware of iOS, macOS. Don't expect Apple to go back to like a 12-year-old device at some point and say like, oh, you know, if we really tried, we could port it to iOS 18 or any. No. That's just not how Apple operates. At some point, some of their decisions will seem arbitrary because of that, right? People have said, oh, the A11 has a neural engine. Why does the A12 get neural engine exclusive features? But then when you actually look at the neural engine, you will find that the neural engine in the A12 chip is like almost an order of a magnitude faster. And not just that, but the actual like resources that are left for the neural engine on the chip are infinitely higher basically on the A12, because on the A11 the neural engine basically could run Face ID, right? It didn't do pretty much anything else, while on the A12 it was supposed to be very versatile. Not obviously quite as versatile as the CPU, but it was supposed to be also used for other tasks. And over the years, Apple started adding those tasks into the operating system and specifically optimized them for the ANE. But then people got angry why devices without the ANE or with the first generation slow ANE suddenly didn't get those features. So I know this was quite a big distraction, but I'm just trying to give you context for everything. I already don't even remember the original point that I was trying to make. So let's just continue. As I said, Geekbench, Cinebench, different tests. Geekbench, you could probably see here like the continuous testing of the single core. Then you see the spikes as you're utilizing more and more cores. You almost have to think that for Geekbench to be a super duper reliable multi-core test, it probably has to find an artificial way to prolong the testing, right? Almost like a stress test option or something like that. Then we could really see what the peak power consumption, the sustained peak power consumption would be. For now, yeah, I do though obviously admit to the fact that the M3 Max uses more power than the M2 or M1 versions.
35, so a lot more power usage for just one of those tests. And holy smokes, the M3 Max is 49% faster than the
this goes back to what I mentioned like half an eternity ago about efficiency, right? So even if it ends up using like, let's say 1/3 more performance, more power, but delivers you 50% higher performance, that still is a higher efficiency chip. And obviously once you scale that down, because you don't want to run your entire processor at full blast while you're doing regular tasks, that efficiency is very likely to scale to like about like 5, maybe 10% higher efficiency in most everyday tasks. Sometimes Apple will give that up in order to give you more performance throughout the day, right? It's their choice basically, how they treat clock frequencies, how quickly they ramp up the fan to allow for more performance to even come in the first place. But yeah, I would still expect M3 Max to, in the worst case, match the battery life of the M2 Max in everyday tasks. Come a little below that if you don't account for the fact that it's way faster and will get certain tasks done quicker. And I expect it to be a little better if you fully normalize for the same performance level.
M2 Max. That is absolutely...
By the way, we are now over half an hour in. We have quite more people watching. I just want to encourage you, if you are watching this and you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe, like, share, comment. I love to interact with the live chat. And if you're watching this, you're really enjoying the content, and you want to support this channel directly, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, or you can support me even directly right here with a super chat or a super sticker. That would be very much appreciated if you can afford it.
Mind-blowing. This is basically running up to the M2 Ultra in terms of multi-core performance. And even
yes, but it's also pretty much the only test that does that. When you look at your Cinebenches, your other like prolonged CPU tests, you will still find the M2 Ultra usually ahead, which makes sense. It has like 16 high performance cores. Obviously, Apple has the M3 Max has 12, and then it has 8 efficiency cores versus 4 on the M3 Max, because obviously it's 2 dice of the M2 Max combined. So Apple can offset like maybe the fact that it has like fewer performance cores thanks to them being clocked higher, but then it also has way fewer efficiency cores, and then the M2 Ultra is usually allowed to run at much higher power consumption levels because it's put into the Mac Studio. It actually makes me really excited for an M3 Ultra Mac Studio, because I think with the higher peak power consumption, this is finally the point where we really absolutely cannot conceive of an Ultra being put into a laptop, right? I think previously we could make argument, okay, with a little bit of clock speed management, if we made like the MacBook Pro like 20-30% thicker, if we gave it an extra fan, if we made all those fans run at top speed all the time, maybe you can do it. I think now that we reach like, instead of, as they said, 35 watts, we reach almost 50 watts. This is the point where the Ultra truly has to be a desktop product, and that makes me happy, because in my opinion that gives the Mac Studio more purpose almost, right? Because now you really cannot conceive of sure, it also has it will most likely also offer a Max processor option, but that also runs a little bit more power hungry on the MacBook Pro. So here you could run it more often at full tilt, and then just leverage its better cooling system, and of course the fact that it doesn't depend on battery life. Basically, it's the typical desktop versus laptop argument, just executed far more elegantly than with a triple layer cheeseburger that are some gaming laptops, right?
More interesting, the difference between the M2 Max and the M1 Max was tiny, but now it's a massive difference. And now let's do the metal graphics test. We have barely any difference in terms of the cores, 38 cores on the M2 Max up to 40 now. So let's see what difference we get. Now with either of them, and especially the 14-inch MacBook Pro, the best way to boost your multitasking workflow is with the Gemino's dual stacked monitor from our sponsor Mobile Pixels, which is a game changer for multitasking workflow, allowing me to drag and drop files and clips from the top display right into my video editing app on the bottom, all while taking screenshots from my video on my MacBook, saving me time and money. And
I'm leaving the ad on because, for one, I'm obviously like, I try to not quite be as a sniper wolf when it comes to my React content. I put a lot of work into making sure that I understand what I'm talking about. I'm trying to react something that is already high quality, not random TikToks. And I obviously try to really extend it, not artificially by just blabbering on. Sometimes that is just my character. But I try to extend it by actually inserting meaningful additions to it. At least I hope you guys agree on that part. Otherwise, why are you watching? But yeah, I'll leave the ad in because those guys do like amazing work. Maybe check out their sponsor if you're interested.
And it's all stacked onto this compact base, which saves desk space and comes with a bunch of extra ports. So check out the Gemino's dual stack monitor using the link below. And for graphics, it looks like we're only getting a 9.7% raw performance.
Yeah, obviously, that, by the way, goes above, obviously, just the 2 extra performance cores, just the 2 extra GPU cores from 38 to 40. So it's, at least those cores seem to be either higher clocked, or something about its cache or anything is making a little bit higher of a difference than just what would be around 5% increase in cores. However, obviously, Geekbench Metal is not the greatest test for GPU performance, especially nothing resembling like workflows regarding gaming. By the way, if you're watching this and if you have something that you really think I should react to afterwards, if you have something that you really believe should be analyzed, I'm obviously open to it. I do, my time is a little limited, but if you find something that's really, really worth watching, might check it out.
Performance increase, which isn't that good, even though the GPU wattage actually went up to 50 watts, which is crazy compared to 38 on the M2 Max. But we do have a bunch of...
Yeah, this is, by the way, where I'm talking about like peak power usage really not being something you should take too seriously. You can see that it's like one peak and then it's like dies down to like 2/3, less than that, half that. So really don't use peak power consumption as like a reasonable metric to actually like analyze how much energy a chip will use. Because for that you also have to consider like peak power usage is interesting when you're building a cooling system, so the OEM definitely needs to know that. If you're buying a GPU, it's good to know because that will like dictate what power supply you might need, right? But when it comes to sustained performance, you can clearly see that those differences are not as gigantic as that peak number might make it look.
New GPU features, including ray tracing, which we're going to be testing in just a minute. And now let's do a real-world gaming benchmark, which is going to be showing off those new GPU features and seeing what kind of differences for gaming workloads we're going to get. There you go. That is what I'm talking about. 188 FPS on the M3 Max compared to 100.
It's like what, 25%?
25% faster.
Exactly, okay.
That's a big difference.
Okay, so I didn't get as far as the GPU testing, so that's actually pretty interesting to me. Yeah, 25% faster without faster memory, right? Without significant increases in like cache count. This is actually a really good architecture. Now from as far as I know, it does consume more power with it, which limits its capabilities once you scale it down to smaller, passively cooled devices, especially like the iPhone. But real-world results are also very, very different. This is, by the way, why I don't react to GeekerVan content, because they like conflate like artificial benchmarks with dubious power metrics. And then they get into an actual game, and in that game, the phone suddenly starts using, for the entire SoC, like 2 times less power than the artificial benchmark showed for just the GPU. And at that point, I just have to really confront them on the fact that, like, if that is so far off, at what point does your artificial benchmark become so artificial that it becomes meaningless? I'm not saying the A17, for example, is incapable of using 10 or even 12 watts just for its GPU. But then you have to consider, well, is the artificial benchmark then limited in other ways? For example, hey, I see somebody joined the chat. Very glad you could. But is the benchmark maybe limited by some other factor, right? Is it maybe just limited by its engine and the way it's optimized for this specific chip? Is it maybe bandwidth limited and hitting really hard ceiling with even LPDDR5 6400? This is where artificial benchmarks really suck to a bad point, right? Because everything sucks, right? You can take the best optimized game ever, and it sucks because it's so well optimized. Therefore, it's not as representative of the results you will see in most games that are probably less optimized, right? But once we look at artificial benchmarks that really show no correlation with the actual real world results, then you really have to start considering that just doesn't make sense. We really should start looking into better ways to analyze real world results rather than the easy to replicate and easy to do artificial benchmarks, but then you get still bad data, right? There is no point in saving time and effort if what you get in the end is something poor. 3D Mark specifically, by the way, is a decently well-maintained artificial benchmark. Not the best. Well, it probably is the best when it comes to artificial benchmarks, but it's still worse than actual like big games that you would now be getting on iOS, iPadOS, macOS. But it's like so much better than GFX Bench. It's not even funny. GFX Bench is at this point like it has not gotten a single relevant API improvement since it started adding metal, right? So it's like 5-6 years in the past, and then in the meantime you got like different benchmarks added, right? You got like small improvements, making sure that it runs on the new operating system version, but you got basically nothing to take advantage of new architectures, which is partially why it really likes trying to say that why it really likes Snapdragon chips. Not to say that Snapdragon chips aren't fast in their GPU, but their performance deltas versus the A series chips in GFX Bench don't represent their performance deltas at all in real world games. But the reason why it happens that way is because obviously on iOS it uses just metal, and you need to at least fully understand metal, right? Well, not like every single aspect of it, but you need to like know how to make stuff for metal to make it decently optimized. And I know that's kind of self-explanatory, it's so stupid, right? But when it comes to the OpenGL and Vulkan tests for all these for Android, well, now you have to do less because obviously those are open things. You can get like more enthusiastic people just come in, do a little bit of code, port it basically, I would say, perfectly to Android, because obviously this is how those kinds of tests start. They rarely start out as metal tests. But if you are an actual game developer, believe me, you are building metal for iOS. Sometimes you might start with a what is it called, an OpenGL or a Vulkan app, and then port it to metal, but you will never just like do the bare minimum. I know this is like obviously like kind of nuance, and it sounds bad coming from a non-programmer. I'm a medical student, so shut up, Mark, right? I guess, but and I've rambled on, but I really want you guys to understand that GFX Bench is really not representative of the real world. I tried to say that in 50 sentences instead of the one sentence that I could have said it in. I apologize for that. Let's continue. 3D Mark is better than GFX Bench
compared to that small Geekbench difference we got. And this is actually 57% faster than my M1 Max 32 core that I do actually use for gaming sometimes, playing War Thunder. Maybe I should upgrade.
I play on my M1 Max primarily emulators. Obviously only for stuff that I've purchased to get off my back, Nintendo ninjas. But yes, it's quite a nice improvement, but I don't think that I would upgrade before I got at least double the performance.
And now let's get into web design using Figma. This is a project provided to us by 500 Designs, one of the best design studios over in Cali. All right, the first test is to zoom in and see how fast some of this content loads up. That was basically instant. I didn't even see it not be sharp. Let's test it over here. I'm expecting insanely fast results as well. Both of them are crazy fast for this. But getting into the main test, we're actually gonna export 12 of these layers at 4 times resolution and see which one finishes first. And we have our scores, and it looks like the M2 Max took 10 seconds longer, so not a very big difference, a minute and 28 on the M3 Max, and they both beat out the M1 Max by quite a bit.
Well, when we actually look at raw like GPU compute improvements, the M2 Max over the M1 Max is supposedly a larger increase. But I do believe this is I don't even know what part of the SoC Figma fully leverages, right? Like, do you guys know? Like, might it be hitting also like almost like storage bottlenecks at this point once we get like so fast? I kind of always assumed it's a CPU test, which, I mean, it could still line up with mostly single core improvements, but then also the M2 Max versus M1 Max improvement is quite big. And I've also seen like Windows tests where it performs like a lot better. So I'm not an expert in this test, so I'll just let it be. As I always pride myself, well, apparently not on perfect preparation for each specific portion of a video, but I do pride myself on only commenting on stuff that I actually understand. If you know what Figma exactly tests on macOS, right, the version, the way it's optimized for Mac, please let me know.
And now let's get into programming performance with our Xcode
CPU
benchmark. And by the way,
I know
it
that
has been completely
that tests
redone,
the CPU.
so all of the old scores are no longer compatible. Everything is new, and the test is a little bit harder. So let's see what we get. And wow, programmers, this M3 Max is absolutely killing it. Only 79 seconds in this test. The M2 Max took 39% longer, and then the M1 Max took 64% longer. So programmers are getting a really good deal with this M3 Max because it's blazing through.
Yeah, you're getting close to double the performance of the M1 Max. Not quite, at least when it comes to CPU tasks. But yeah, that like really makes me excited for the M3 Ultra, because obviously every Ultra is like very exciting because it doubles or sort of doubles the performance of the Max chip. But now that Apple seems to have mostly figured out scaling, dynamic caching is supposedly going to help with that further as well in many tasks. They have an absurd amount of memory now, even on the M3 Max. So on the M3 Ultra, that would probably mean you will get 256 gigabytes of memory. So yeah, it's super exciting in my opinion, especially since I believe that this is where the M3 Ultra will realistically become relevant also for like rendering. Obviously on-the-go rendering on this MacBooks is amazing, because not only do you get a lot more performance than previously, but you also get still the high battery life that you know from MacBooks. You get the sustained performance regardless of whether you're plugged in or not that you know from Apple Silicon MacBooks. So while you might still obviously reach like higher rendering performance on an RTX 4070 or 4080, the overall experience, from what I've heard from people who already did rendering even on the M2 devices, was still like really good. You had like your big amount of memory to play with, now all the way up to 128. You have like your sustained performance regardless of battery power or not. Now you have an even nicer screen with up to 600 nits peak brightness. So if you're actually using it outdoors, that makes it far like the best screen as far as I know, right? Because there are some like work machines that will give you a lot of peak brightness, but they don't have like nice mini LED screens. And then you have mini LED screens on other devices that max out at 500 nits, usually coming in a little below that rating, more at like 450. And then you have like OLED screens that, while they do get pretty bright, they're much much less bright than 600 nits, and they can struggle with color accuracy if you really drastically change the brightness level. All of that has improved in recent years. Apple's gap over others was not as big when they still had 500 nits mini LED screens, but now that they're at 600, they've basically are as far ahead as they were before.
Get into Logic Pro Music production performance. Now this is gonna be exciting. Let's see how much these can handle. We're gonna do 240 tracks on each, which is gonna be tough. Oh, right away, the system overloaded.
Now, this is, I should say, this is not like a realistic test when it comes to how many tracks you have. However, I've heard it from, I said that, and then I've heard from people who actually work with large tracks. Well, that's part of it, right? Is that the track might actually be significantly longer than what they test. Right, if you're work with orchestral data, right, you might have your 50, 60 audio tracks or whatever. I know there are far fewer instruments, but maybe you had microphones everywhere, basically, who knows. Or maybe you try to overlay different data from different recordings and stuff like that, try to compare, maybe put a little part of one over the other. Obviously that is far less clean than just what you would expect from our orchestral stuff, but then again, people do experimental stuff all the time these days. So you might not necessarily have 200 tracks as they are testing 240, but you might have 50 tracks at 4 times the length or something like that. And of course it will depend on the actual quality level you recorded at. So I've heard reasons from people that while their tests in its specificity might not be very representative, that it's still somewhat relevant because it allows people to extrapolate in their head, well, what does it mean for my very long project? What does it mean for my extreme high quality projects? So while I'm by no means an audiophile or an expert with audio engineering anyway, apparently their testing does hold some value for people.
Basically means the CPU couldn't handle that many tracks at once. All right, guys, can you hear the fan? That's the first time we've heard the fan so far, and we just played 328 tracks. I don't think we've ever hit that before, and it's mind-blowing because this stopped at 194. That's all it can run. That's 69% more tracks that it can run, but get this, my M1 Max only...
Okay, similar complaint here to, I believe, to Greg's Gadgets. This is not, what they're showing here is not 69% faster. This is 3 times longer, 2.5 times longer, the bar. I have no... Is that a problem in their... Well, that's their... No, it's correct. It's the Logic Pro benchmark. No, but you guys see what I'm talking about? It's the graphs. That's not how you show 64% more tracks.
More tracks that it can run, but get this, my M1 Max only ran 118.
Yeah, I remember that was actually really impressive because that was, I believe, about as much or even more than what the 2019 highest configured Mac Pro could do, or at least the version that they had. I'm not quite sure if they tested it on a higher configuration. So obviously you got more than that. I assume this also has to do obviously with the memory that is paired with the processor. That being said, it's still impressive either way.
Tracks! And you're not going to believe this, guys. The M2 Ultra only handled 320 tracks compared to 328.
Oh, that's still good.
Thing is beating the M2 Ultra, and you can get 100.
Oh, okay, so that's over the M2 Ultra. That's different, because the M1 Ultra in that case would have been more than twice as fast in that regard if you want to equate amount of tracks with speed, which you probably shouldn't, but let's just flow with that, go with that. In that case, what he had shown, the M1 Ultra would be more than twice as performant as the M1 Max. Where are we here? Yeah, So I think this is just a mislabeling on the graph. And yeah, by the way, 118 to 328. By the way, this is like 5 times longer. If those graphs were proportional, we would be talking about this being like 600 or something like that. So yeah, they really need to rethink their graphs. I know it probably means that it starts at like 50 or something like that, maybe even more higher than that, but it's still not how it should work. 50, this would add 70. No, it cannot start at 50. Where would it start then? It's like, because this would be like, this is an 76 point difference. This is about 2/3 that, maybe. No, it looks like half. So it would start at like around 40. I apologize, this is very nitpicky. Just trying to say those graphs are not proportional.
Compared to 328, this thing is beating the M2 Ultra, and you can get 128 gigs of unified memory. This is the ultimate workstation in a laptop. And now let's move on to Cinebench 2024 doing some CPU.
By the way, really glad that Apple kept on like their memory game. Now, I have voiced concerns with the fact that they're still on LPDDR5. Obviously, they introduced the M1 Pro and M1 Max version 2 years ago, and that was when they started using LPDDR5 6400. The original M1 used LPDDR4X still. For example, I have an M1 iPad Pro. So I wish they would have gone with LPDDR5X by this point, but it's still obviously nice to see that they allowed us to like go from 64 gigabytes peak on the M1 Max to 96 gigabytes on the M2 Max to now 128 gigabytes on the M3 Max. Now, makes me almost wonder if, like, with higher capacity modules with LPDDR5X or even something like LPDDR5T, which would be a full 50% faster, allowing us to go all the way up to 600 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, which for a chip that also has quite a generous amount of cache is absolutely insane. Maybe they would give us another 50% more memory or something like that. Can you imagine maxing out your laptop at 196 gigabytes of memory that can be shared between the CPU, GPU, the neural engine? That is just insanity, and that will not be replicated by Windows devices anytime soon.
Benchmarking, and by the way, we came back the next day. I closed the laptops. They both lost around 10%, so everything is still equal. Let's get into this. All right, we got MX Power Gadget. Look at that, 50 watts on the M3 Max right away. Only hit about 33 on the M2 Max. In terms of the progress, this thing is absolutely flying, and I can actually hear the fans. Wow, the fans are ramping up so much faster than they did last year, especially compared to this. It's barely idling. Wow, guys, the fans are going, they're like literally maxing out. The fans are basically maxing out right now. That is absolutely insane. The temps are nice and cool, 96 degrees Celsius relatively compared to about 103 on the M2 Max machine. The fans are still almost barely.
Yeah, that seems like a difference in fan curves. This is why I also try to really calm down the fuck people when it comes to like exact temperatures on an SoC. Different chips will sometimes have the sensors inside slightly different places. Once you actually go to super high density transistors, there will be some heat trapping on an almost microscopic level, at which point even with the best cooling system you cannot really fully dissipate the heat as well as you might have gotten with like a generation that had significantly larger gaps between transistors and much larger transistors in general. That does not mean that the chip will somehow die much faster. I don't know how many years we've gone through that, where like Apple devices that were even like overheating did not ever actually die of overheating. If anything ever died of overheating, that means something was tinkered with in either the software or the hardware, because obviously if it was ever at the risk of overheating, then it would cool down. It would throttle down, which, yeah, it's not a great consumer experience, but it does not relegate something to the landfill, as some people have said. Like, oh, it runs at 103 or 104 degrees Celsius. That means this device is like destined to die sooner than whatever device runs at 98 degrees. No, that's just not how it works whatsoever.
Running, and the surprising thing is that even though this thing has 12 performance cores compared to 8 on the M2 Max, they're all running at 3.58 gigahertz compared to 3.26, so you got 50% more, and they're going faster. Surprisingly, the E-cores are only going about 2.47 compared to...
Yeah, that probably has everything to do with just the architecture of the E-cores. So let me go exactly what it means. It's 50 divided by 35 let's do it exactly. 50.1 divided by 35.56. That is 40% higher power consumption on well, that's the package power. This is, by the way, like, okay, so let's just do the CPU exactly, right? Let's just do 51.06 divided by 36.1. It's not going to make a meaningful difference. It's 41.4% fast, more power consumption. So let's see how much faster it actually is.
2.42. Not much of a difference, but this is just crazy. It's been about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna bust out the thermal cam and see how both of these are performing in terms of temps. And wow, only 35 degrees as a hotspot where the chip is located, and look at the amount of heat right here, 38 degrees right there on the display, because that's where the fans are blowing out, 39 degrees on that spot with the dual fans. Let's check this thing out, 40 degrees Celsius hotspot, so it is a little bit hotter on the chip itself, and also 41 degrees on the display. So it looks like the M3 is doing a killer job at keeping the chip cool. There you go, we have our scores, and wow, 1572 on the M3 Max compared to 912 on the M2 Max. That's 72%.
Okay, yeah, I don't even need to calculate that, but what does this say? They said 72% faster. I'll take their word for that.
Wow, 1572 on the M3 Max compared to 912 on the M2 Max. That's 72%.
Okay, so it's 41.4% faster. 72 divided by 40. That's about 22% more energy efficient. So it needs 40% more power, let's say 41, but it delivers 72% more performance. That's really, really nice uplift. Obviously, it leverages here a lot from higher peak frequencies to more cores in general. So, and 22% over an N5P chip, now that we are an N3B, actually is very, very in line with the promises of 3 nanometer. Might even be slightly better than that, because the original comparisons are against N5, not N5P. So yeah, 22% higher efficiency, not bad.
faster than the one that came out 9 months ago. This is mind-blowingly good. And now let's actually do the GPU test, which potentially is using ray tracing, but we're gonna see.
It does. It uses the redshift rendering, which uses, of course, our ray tracing. And yeah, it seems to already support Metal RT. And without it, the results just wouldn't look the same. That just wouldn't be possible.
In just a second, and I do want to mention that this crazy performance that we just got in CPU is in a laptop that's unplugged. It's not plugged into power compared to a massive Mac Pro. This just blows my mind. Holy smokes, guys, 12,343 compared to 5,901. That's 2.1 times faster.
I've seen tests where it's like over 2.5 times faster. I've seen tests where it comes up to like 14,000. Maybe it was still a little hot from the previous benchmark they ran. Maybe it's just like run-to-run variance in still what is a relatively new version of Cinebench, especially not fully optimized for these specific chips. Not going to even say that it will happen, that kind of optimization, but yeah, I've seen even higher differences.
Year over year, this must be using ray tracing
It
because
is.
that's the only way to make sense of this insanely good score. And speaking of ray tracing, let's get into Blender 3D rendering because we have Blender 4.0 beta, which supports ray tracing. So
Okay, they have Blender 4.0, but there is Blender 4.1 already. So I know that 4.0 supports ray tracing. As far as I know, 4.1 is supposed to also come with like really good dynamic caching support. It's still a little unclear because 4.1 is just so freaking early. Yeah, but it seems like there is a beta for Blender 4.1, even not just an alpha. Maybe I'm just getting something wrong here. macOS. No, Blender 4.1 for macOS is still counted as alpha. And Blender 4.01 gets a release candidate. That's actually really nice. So it's actually pretty advanced how far it has gotten.
This party tug project right here, let's go ahead and render. All right, guys, this is blowing my mind because the M3 Max is already done. I'll show you the score in just a minute, but I noticed they were using about the same amount of wattage for the GPU, around 32, 33, but this thing's still going. Does that mean that ray tracing is just not using that much more power?
No, it does not. Apple does not have extra RT cores in the way that NVIDIA does. And in actual games, what you sometimes do, because ray tracing task is so intense, it actually ends up pushing the rasterization part of the CPU, of the GPU, a little down, right? Because it just either cannot produce as many frames per second, or it just people will tune it to a lower resolution, but then the ray tracing cores will consume their part. Now, ray tracing on Apple's part is, as far as I know, is integrated into the shaders of the actual GPU. That still could mean that it consumes more power, right? You can run very different tasks on a CPU or a GPU that take really full architectural advantage of everything on there, and then it consumes a lot more power. This is somewhat when you differentiate between AVX 512 support and stuff like that on very high-end CPUs these days. But yeah, usually ray tracing does not actually increase performance that substantially. Similarly, it will also be more likely to be like memory bandwidth limited to a degree, or if you're doing games, it will sometimes even be CPU limited because it needs data from more cores to coordinate the given task. Now, that is not the case when we're talking about offline rendering, just trying to add a little more nuance coming also from the PC and console space.
And guys, you're not gonna believe this score. 27.5 seconds on the M3 Max compared to a minute on the M2 Max, over twice as fast.
Yeah, I've seen like even tests where it goes down to 1/3. I've seen like some weird things where I don't know if it's something is broken about it, but it seems like it will be that much faster even with Metal RT off. But then if you turn Metal RT on, it's like another 10 to 15% faster. That's a beta thing. I don't know if it will be like this way once it's actually released. Josephat, did I end up buying the M3 Max? No, I did not. I do my streams from time to time. I do just regular videos. I play around with emulators, with some virtual machines, and currently I'm not experiencing any bottlenecks that would prevent me from like enjoying my experience with my M1 Max MacBook Pro. So if I didn't feel the need to go to the M2 Max, which as you see was already plenty fast in comparison to the M1 Max, the M3 Max, because currently I'm not doing anything ray tracing dependent, yeah, I'm not getting it. Though I probably would wait until we get like maybe as far as OLED MacBook Pros, right? Supposedly those are coming in 2026, maybe even in 2027. In 2026, this might coincide with the launch of 2nm devices, and then my MacBook Pro would be exactly 5 years old, which I think is quite an amazing time to keep a device while it still remains relatively high end. I don't expect anything to come out in the meantime that will make my M1 Max device feel suddenly slow, at least not when we are not comparing like specifically like ray tracing tasks or something like that. So this is kind of my thinking, but yeah, the M1 Max, people forget, is just 2 years old. People always associate when they hear M1 with like the launch in 2020 of the M1 MacBook Air, but it took us actually a full year to get M1 Pro and M1 Max. So this is just 2 years old, and we're already almost 4 times faster.
And the M1 Max, which I have, took over 1 minute and 40 seconds. So this thing's 3 times faster, over 3 times faster than that one. So basically, if you're doing 3D rendering, now that we have ray tracing, this is a must upgrade for anybody doing 3D work. And here we have Lightroom Classic doing our photo editing export test. We have 50, 42.
Zuboito, I've actually I've seen, okay, my grammar left me there for a second. I've actually seen your Twitter message before coming into the stream. I wanted to respond to you. You watched the Max Tech video, and now you're watching me watch the Max Tech video. That's cool.
Raw images, so let's go ahead.
By the way, we have a couple of more people watching now, so I want to really encourage you, if you're watching this and enjoying it and you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe, like, share. Feel free to comment, because I love interacting with you guys live in the chat. And if you really like what you're seeing, please consider supporting this channel directly. You can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, or you can even support me directly right here, right now, with a super chat or a super sticker. All of that is very much appreciated.
Head and get these exported. Guys, this M3 Max is absolutely flying. It is mind-blowing. I've never seen it happen this fast. Holy smokes, it finished. Wow, that is a crazy good score. The M2 Max is just about to finish. 30 seconds flat for the M3 Max compared to 40.
That's actually interesting, because I remember when that result came out, people speculated if maybe this test on like these Macs is maybe even like somewhat bottlenecked by the speed of the SSD, because obviously the export portion of it is a substantial portion. But yeah, 30 seconds versus 46 and 48, quite a nice improvement.
It's basically 50% faster. I have never seen any machine do that.
Yeah, it's 50% faster. Yeah, it's not half the time, because that would be twice as fast.
This test that fast, and it is blowing my mind. I'm sorry everybody who bought the M2 Max. We did warn you and tell you it was basically a...
No, I think the M2 Max is still a good device. It came out 9-10 months ago. It gave you options for like more memory than on the M1 Max before. It had Wi-Fi 6E and stuff like that. So I don't think there's any reason to really be sad if you got the M2 Max, unless you got it in like the last 2 months or something like that.
Stopgap for the M3 family, because my M1 Max did it in 48 seconds, so you basically got 2 seconds faster on this thing, but 30 seconds on the M3 Max. Photo editors, you're gonna want this upgrade. And now let's move on to video editing in Final Cut Pro. And this first test is a 5-minute project with 4K HEVC footage. It's basically the most common format that people shoot with and edit today. And it looks like they both finished in 1 minute and 14 seconds. There's absolutely no difference.
Yeah, this is absolutely encoder limited in this case. Sometimes you would probably be able to go a little faster if maybe you pushed it all the way to 8K. But yeah, H.264, H.265, really don't expect that many great improvements there.
Even though we saw massive differences in other tests, that's because they have the same encoders, and that is what the system is limited by, because they're just insanely fast. And now let's go all out and do the hardest test that we have. This is 4 streams of 4K ProRes RAW, which basically simulates 8K ProRes RAW. And as you can see, there you go, you have 4 clips.
And I've said that in the beginning of this video, Final Cut Pro is supposedly getting an update at the end of the month, and that update will come with performance improvements. We don't know if those performance improvements are M3 specific, seems most likely, but yeah, so we will probably need to get some comparisons in 2 weeks.
The same time, so let's go ahead and get this exported. It looks like they're both running around the same, but the M3 Max is winning because it does have more GPU power, a little bit more because it looks like ray tracing is not being used at all. So the little gain that it has in raw performance is showing some improvements here. This just finished and we have about 2 minutes 20 seconds for the M3 Max and 2 minutes and 36 for the M2 Max.
Yeah, as far as I know, the handling of multiple like files, right, was improved on the M2 Max, but the actual encoders are largely the same. So it came down to really some optimization on like the SoC level rather than the actual like media engine block on the SoC. So obviously not an expert at all in the architectural details of media encode and decode blocks on Apple's SoCs, but I've heard that this was where some improvements were coming from, and I wonder if this is where we will see the actual improvements, right? A lot of data, 8K ProRes, which is obviously like Apple's own standard. I wonder if like once we got like the Final Cut Pro update that Apple is promising, if that is where we'll see the gains.
And this actually looks like around the same difference that we got in our raw GPU performance in Geekbench, because it's not taking advantage of all those other gaming GPU features or anything. This is just raw GPU compute. So in this case, for video editors, it doesn't really look like it makes sense to upgrade. But the good news is that the M1 Max that I have took 3 minutes and 35 seconds. So that's actually a pretty big improvement for this machine, and actually might be a worthy upgrade if you're doing crazy video editing like this. And now with all of that testing completed, let's get into the conclusion. But first, I want to show off these battery life numbers. Looking at the M3 Max, we have 14% battery, and I do want to emphasize that we've been running it at 600 nits compared to 500 because it has a capability.
Oh, wow. All right. They really went all out to really like say, man, if you're using this, you better take advantage of it. But I kind of understand, like, it's obviously November right now, so it's not the best time to say, yeah, you can really leverage 600 nits pretty well. But yeah, whenever I use it in like the spring, I like to like learn outdoors and stuff like that. this is why I often use my iPad, even though I often prefer the MacBook for like the macOS capabilities for certain stuff. 500 nits could be a little bit of a limitation. So I'm really glad that they're now offering 600 nits, and really cool from MaxTech to test it out this way.
And we did actually do more testing on this machine, like for example in
By the way, guys, please let me know. You can see the video down below. We made iMessage for Android. Now I have no idea if I'll be able to monetize my video if I react to this, but I'm actually mildly interested in watching this, right? It's only 6 minutes. It's Nothing, the company that makes the Nothing phone, ported iMessage for Android, even with the ability of you obviously to send blue bubbles. So please let me know if this is something you would be interested in, because this also goes obviously into now this has nothing to do with the Mac really, but this goes into other issues that I sometimes discuss, like open operating systems, cross compatibility, government regulations when it comes to opening up certain platforms and certain services. So if you're watching this and you are interested, please let me know.
Logic, where it was surprising us by how much tracks it was running, so we kept adding more, so it drained quite a bit of battery life there. So now let's look at the M2 Max. 5% battery life. Guys, this is insane. Even with all of that extra power, even with all the extra tests.
Now, with that extra power, it got through a lot of tests much quicker, right? That does not obviously apply to all tests, right? In some tests, it just ran for longer, for just as long while delivering more performance. For example, in the GPU tests usually, like the gaming test. But then in Blender, where it got like 2.5 times performance, or 2.1 times, then it got through that task much quicker. So while it probably had a little bit faster peak power, a little bit higher peak power consumption, that did really not impact it that much. The same goes for Cinebench in its CPU test. While it might have consumed 40% less power because it had like 70% better result, that obviously meant it went through the task a lot quicker. Now, that is not to say, I don't even know if they did like deliberately prolonged stress tests. In that case, I would assume that the M3 Max would have lower battery life. However, there's one hardware point that I want to highlight while we discuss battery life, and this is that rumors have pointed towards the mini LED screen here being significantly more energy efficient. Now, significantly more is as low as 10% and as high as 15%, which could mean that even at 600 nits, it might still have higher peak power consumption, but brightness scaling is not always the same as all power consumption scaling, because there is a baseline of power that you need for certain quality output from the get-go. That being said, it really seems like it's at the high end of efficiency gain predictions for the display, because to be still on like having like 10% more battery life almost while running the screen at such a higher brightness level, that's honestly incredibly impressive.
That we did, and
this also, by the way, is like really good statement on the M3 MacBook Pro, right? Now, while yes, at $1,600 we can argue about should it have come with more than 8 gigs of memory, for example. My argument is yes, it should have, definitely, but the meaningful context here is that you still get like that kind of nice screen, the amazing speakers, the great keyboard, the large trackpads, all of that, the high quality 1080p camera, the studio quality microphones. You still get all of that in a $1,600 device, and I highly assume that Apple made that like $1,800 configuration configuration with 16 gigabytes of memory and 512 gigabytes of storage to scale, right? In the sense that they will sell it to third parties, and then third parties will give you discounts by $100 or $150, and suddenly it's closer to the price of what those $1,600 machine, but now you pay $1,700 or so, and you get 16 gigs of memory, and Apple gets its higher profit margin, and they still can advertise that they have a $1,600 MacBook Pro now with all those niceties, right? So yeah, just wanted to say that it's really cool that all that stuff is also available on substantially cheaper devices. If you're buying a MacBook and you are like, you only watch videos and you only work with Word documents, right? You could get away with the $1,600 model and potentially get it even for cheaper with discounts at like $1,450 or $1,500.
Extra brightness, we're still getting better battery life on the M3 Max. This is blowing my mind. The conclusion of this is, wow, I am so surprised. This is by far the best M3 family upgrade we've had so far.
I mean,
Massive,
I think he said, I think he means that this is like the best improvement across the M3 family, because the M3 has like the same core configuration as the M2. The M3 Pro actually has fewer performance cores than the M2 Pro, but this gives you more performance cores. It gives you even more GPU cores, even if that increase is rather small overall. So yeah, I can understand the excitement here.
Max, this is the one that we were waiting for, and Apple did such a great job. Even if you have the M1 Max, I would say it might even be worth it if you are looking.
So Boyd, you're saying M3 is also nice. I actually think that all M3 chips are nice. MaxTech even made the video where they said like, we're sorry Apple, the M3 Pro is basically way better than we expected. I think this is the most balanced lineup. I think it's worse value for the people who really want to get a lot of CPU power without paying that much more, right? That was where the M2 Pro, for example, was great, because it had the same number of all core CPU cores as the M2 Max, right? It had the bin down version, but obviously you could still get a higher end version. Here, if you get the M3 Pro, you end up with half as many performance cores. Now you get a few more efficiency cores, but you basically get a lot less CPU performance than the M3 Max. So I think, given that the M3 Pro also has very distinct battery life advantages over the M2 Pro previously, I believe that this is the best balanced lineup they've ever had when it comes to Apple Silicon. Now, do I believe the value is as good as when they launched $999 MacBook Airs? No, I don't. Because I do believe that at this point, for example, the $1,600 MacBook Pro should be maybe even 1 terabyte and 12 or 16 gigabytes, but definitely 12 or 16 gigabytes with 512 gigabytes of storage. But I do believe that when it comes to actually getting what you want, right, that can be, for example, oh, I don't need that much power, but I want a great screen, get the M3. Oh, I just want a little bit more CPU power, or I want to double the GPU power of the M3, but I really don't need that much more performance and I really still value battery life, get the M3 Pro. Or if you really are an extreme power user, now the M3 Max is more meaningfully differentiated from the M3 Pro than the M2 Max was versus the M2 Pro. M3 Pro is a little bit meh, but also good depending what you need. Again, I've given my point on it. Agree for storage and RAM. I think most people agree. I think some people would ask for even way more than I do, but yeah, I think basically universally it's agreed that it would be nice for it to have more. And also on M3, yeah, the M3 it's different this time, right? Because we're starting with a $1,600 MacBook Pro. We don't know if we get an M3 in a MacBook Air. It could still be paired with like abysmally slow 256 gigabytes, right? And that would really bottleneck the chip. 8 gigabytes are already a bottleneck, pretty much, for the M3. Now imagine it being paired with 2 times slower SSDs. Imagine what that would do for SSD swap between memory and storage. Sorry, I lost my mouse on my iPad, my cursor.
More performance than what you currently have, and especially if you have an Intel laptop or something like that, this is such an awesome upgrade. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Let me know all your thoughts on these tests down in the comment section below. Definitely subscribe for more because we do have more comparisons coming. Check out that video right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you, Max Tech. And before I move out, I think I would really like to react to the nothing video and see just how glib or smug they are. This might risk the monetization of this video, but fuck it, because I don't know if they like use any kind of music in the background or anything. I have no way to know that right now, but yeah, let's just risk it for the biscuit, right?
Are you gonna?
Yeah. Wait, why am I not logged in?
Are you gonna piss Apple off?
I'm working under the assumption that Tim Cook isn't going to watch this video.
Well, I'm not Tim Cook, but I'm the next best thing. I'm a quickly growing YouTube content creator.
We've developed an app that allows you to iMessage from Android. You've likely heard of the blue bubble, green bubble debate, where Apple's lack of RCS support limits features between Android and iOS.
By the way, RCS is still not quite as feature-rich as iMessage, so even if Apple supported RCS, that would be not the same thing. Oh, there are also nice, like, Xiaomi 14. I actually do want to do some Xiaomi content in the future, but not today. Yeah, nothing today it is.
That risks user privacy, causes discrimination, affects dating.
Nope, it does not. By the way, RCS would not necessarily solve any of those problems by itself, but like, I know it can be encrypted, but yeah, it's people who try to make it look as if RCS is completely 100% the same feature set as iMessage are delusional, and it's heavily Google controlled, so saying it's worse for privacy, like it's better for privacy, well, yeah, maybe over SMS, but guess what? You're not forced to use SMS. Ask anybody outside the freaking United States, and especially just North America in general. People use WhatsApp, people use Telegram, people use Signal, people use Facebook Messenger. I use all of those except for Facebook Messenger on a daily basis. I have 2 of my best friends who use Signal. I have a lot of my stepdad's family over WhatsApp. I have some of my friends from college or med school from my early years still using Telegram, and then most of my family just uses iMessage. And guess what? My fingers are not bloody from switching between those apps. And I have not discriminated against anybody who has had either cheaper iPhone devices or Android devices in my dating life or in my personal life or in my work life. So fuck it.
I mean, it's even in a Drake song.
I just don't have time for this. Go back to the blue bubble.
In our research, we
Yeah, that's stupidity in the USA, but the USA also has way other issues beyond just green and blue bubbles. Just ask the freaking Second Amendment, which can have some validity but can also be very misused. Guess what? The same thing applies to a freaking chat messenger, just on an infinitely lower importance scale.
found James, a journalist at Inverse, who said he'd be open to trying an Android if it didn't mean losing iMessage. To find out more, Carl sat down with him to further understand his feelings and what we can do here at Nothing to make tech better for those on both sides.
By the way, this came out today? It came out a day ago. Apple will freaking close this down. They don't have a license to do this. They might. I don't know how this works yet because I haven't done much research. I've seen the headline about this, I believe early today, but or late yesterday. But yeah, I do not believe that this will stay online. No shot.
Nice to meet you, James. So before we get started, can you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself?
I'm the senior editor at Inverse.com, and I write about a lot of things. I write about phones, just consumer tech in general. Yeah, this is my niche. It's really good to be here with you and talking about something that's part of my wheelhouse.
I love that the one article they showed for a little longer was about Apple, but also still somewhat negative, where they're like, the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro both have USB-C, but there's a bit speed difference, right? It cannot be too positive once we talk about Apple.
You wrote a review on the Pixel 8.
Yeah, the Pixel 8 Pro is a great
No, by the way, it's not a great phone. Honestly, it's not. The Tensor G3 is garbage in comparison to the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. It's absolutely terrible in comparison to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is what most flagship devices of this year had. And it came out pretty late in the year, so its more meaningful competitors will be the Android devices with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which will absolutely wipe the floor with it. Obviously, Apple's A15, A16, and A17 Pro chips all demolish the specific processor we are talking about. The Super Actual display is actually quite nice, and it gets pretty bright. Still not quite as bright as they claim, and actually below the iPhone, but what will you do? The camera is not longer the smartphone king in stills. I would put the iPhone above it, but even if you put it in the top 3, that still is meaningfully worse than the crown that a Pixel used to have. In terms of battery life, while it's better than the previous generation, it's far behind the iPhone Pro. And then when you actually look at everyday experience, right? For example, if you use certain social media apps, they will stutter on the freaking 120 hertz screen of the Pixel 8 Pro, which is, they won't do that even on a 60 like, this is where you get like Apple's fluidity advantages, smoothness advantages, even on a 60 hertz panel, where suddenly those apps run way smoother. Then you have like any kind of task that actually involves you getting into the nitty-gritty a little bit, right? Like encoding a video, which is over twice as fast on the recent iPhones and still way faster on any A16 or A15 iPhone. You also have like heat built up on this device, which the iPhone is not known for its great cooling architecture in comparison to something like the Samsung Ultra devices or the Xiaomi Pro phones or Xiaomi Ultra devices. Guess what? The Pixel is worse than all of them, because not only does it have a pretty thin cooling architecture similar to the iPhone, it has a chip that is significantly less energy efficient. The Pixel Pro 8 Pro is actually not a great device, because for just a little bit more money, you get the far better iPhone, or you wait a little bit and you get a Samsung device that is not just a little better in basically every single perspective, but way better.
great phone, honestly. I was surprised at how much I do actually like it and how much I could see myself using it as my primary device. Overall, it's a good device.
For people out there who don't really understand this entire iMessage thing, could you just explain a little bit?
I love, by the way, that Nothing only got a journalist who was interested in the Pixel 8 Pro. They couldn't get somebody to actually say that they would use a Nothing phone if it got iMessage. They actually had to talk about a competitor device. It's brilliant.
US perspective.
Third-party messaging is a thing here still. It's not like we don't know what WhatsApp is or Signal or Telegram, but it is far
Or
less
WeChat.
common to use those than it is to just text somebody. Like if I
Yeah, by the way, this is complete garbage. Even in the United States, that's not representative of the market share or anything. I know they're trying to say it's more important, but that's absolutely, this is a highly subjective interpretation of just how much more important it is in the United States. Also, of course, I've mentioned all of those apps except WeChat, which obviously has its highest importance in China and other parts of Asia, which is also interesting when you consider the origins of the Nothing company. But granted, they are pretty US focused these days, so I'll not hold it against them to focus on iMessage. It's just funny, the fact that we're talking about like how important iMessage is, the fact that this guy wants it to work on a Pixel and not a Nothing phone. So I know this like gives them the perspective, like the look of like, oh, look how open we are and how in support of all other companies and standards we are. But yeah, that's not how you actually sell your own product, dude.
Asked my friends, like, hey, message me on WhatsApp. They'd be like, what's wrong with you?
Maybe, I don't know. Are you really poor friends with those people? Because like you can also explain stuff to people, right? Like if you were saying, oh, I got a new phone, they will be like, oh, okay, I guess. Like, I don't know, like it's not like people are fascist about like their chat messenger. I know people have a preference, and I have nothing against having preferences. I have freaking preferences. But this is like, when we're especially talking about friends or family members, this is when I really don't understand when people are like, yeah, they really excluded me. Like, my own mother gave up on me because I didn't use iMessage. I'm like, well, that probably reflects more of your relationship with your mother than it does on anything regarding Apple and iMessage itself.
Why? Why would I do that?
What's the main fear about leaving iMessage?
Well, but the question of why is pretty justified, right? You could say, I got a new device that doesn't support iMessage.
Behind.
You can't see when someone's typing, read receipts.
Mhm.
Even the contrast is different, you know, with like the green messages.
How do you message your friends who are on Android?
I text them. I think I'm
Really? Those people don't have... What? Really? Why? I can understand why you would text somebody on an... What? Wait. What was the question?
read receipts.
Mhm.
Even the contrast is different, you know, with like the green messages.
How do you message your friends who are on Android?
Okay, so that's from an... Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. Like, you would text them if you are an Android and they're on iPhone, right? But if they are an Android, then you have the freedom to contact them via WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram or Facebook Messenger or WeChat or whatever, because they're very likely... Nobody on Android just uses RCS. If people are telling you, oh, I can just RCS my Android friends, nobody has WhatsApp anymore or Facebook Messenger, yeah, they're freaking lying to you. What? Why would you not... Why would you just send them regular texts? I assume with regular text he means like regular SMS, right?
I think I'm probably more likely to like message them on Instagram.
Do you think there's any
I know there are young people who do a lot of their stuff through Instagram, and I've seen even some people do like something through Snapchat. I don't use either app, by the way. I apologize. I know most of my viewers are actually as old as I am, or some are like 30 or 40% of you are older, so I hope you empathize with me on this point. Like, if this dude is choosing to contact people on Instagram, which also, by the way, makes it very likely that the other person has a Facebook account and probably could very easily either use Facebook Messenger or already uses it, and then WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal do not require anything from you than just giving your regular number once, which, by the way, is the same requirement as it is with iMessage. Like with iMessage, with iMessage you actually have your Apple ID, but then your Apple ID is already working, obviously, if you have an iPhone. So I admit that it's like maybe one step less, but then to configure the actual number that you want to send and receive stuff, that still requires you to go into some more deeper settings for iMessage.
anything else that's stopping you from moving to Android?
Yeah, there's the familiarity. I've been using iPhones for a long time, and I'm familiar with iOS. There's a lot of crossover between Android and iOS, and that was one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised at, was that just picking...
How were you surprised? Like, do you not, like, how old is this dude? Like, how do you not know that their, like, control center is, like, basically in the notification center for Android, but it mostly looks and operates very similarly because it originated as a UX element basically on jailbreak tweaks, and then Android was the first to, I believe, copy it, and then Apple copied it, and then people said Apple copied it from Android. Widgets, now since iOS 14, Apple has added a lot more widgets. Granted, stealing some stuff from Android, one might say. But then when it comes to widget stacks, that's something Android copied from iOS in return. Like, what exactly, like, it's not like the actual apps would not feel familiar, right? There are only so many ways you would design like a chat messenger or a camera app or even a browser in that regard. So why would you have been pleasant? Like, I guess you could still be pleasantly surprised, just not strongly surprised. It just, everything weirds me out about this. It just feels so dishonest.
Picking up an Android device and using it is pretty intuitive. I think that there's just a lot of crossover.
I'll dislike it
between
later.
Operating systems, and we have this like common language that's applied across both Android and iOS.
Oh my god, they're showing the Nothing Phone UI that also is like the least familiar with like a lot of its looks with like this dotted design. Oh, they couldn't even show the Pixel, which is the device that he obviously liked. Right? Yeah, that's not the Pixel.
Almost seems like a very basic, human need to connect, but
yeah, if only your human needs. Guys, I'll be 100% honest. People who appeal to the human need stuff is like, I'm pretty far left in my politics, right? I believe in universal healthcare, universal basic income. I believe in free tuition in college. Basically, I believe in democratic socialism for most part. I know that socialism has some meaningfully negative connotations. I try to fight against it because I'm not in that term, I'm not a tanky, basically. I don't support dictators that are saying they like leftist policies. That's a discussion neither here nor there, by the way. But I understand human needs in my politics, in my personal life, in my freaking work. As I said, I am a med school student. So believe me, I know how to interact with a patient and stuff like that. If all human needs, right? Food, water, shelter, education, basic freedoms, if all of that could be met as easily as the requirement of downloading one extra app and typing in your phone number into it, then we would live in the most perfect society ever. This kind of complaint that it's too much effort to download one extra app, which, by the way, I use Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp, yes, as my extra apps, but then I also use Twitter, which has become a place where I do direct message with people a lot, so that's 4. And then I have YouTube, which, yes, I know it's not the same, but it's a social media, social network to a degree with comments and everything else like that. Believe me, it did not kill me to install all of that, create accounts, and then manage it in perpetuity however I want. Like, this idea that you're meeting a basic human need because I've ported iMessage to Android, and look, we have dotted designs everywhere now. It's like so freaking stupid. I just cannot believe.
A barrier between iPhone users and Android users?
That barrier is installing WhatsApp once in your life.
What do you think would be necessary for this to change?
People talk about RCS a lot.
No, actually they don't. I wanted to make it 100% clear. the people talking about RCS are paid off by Google. This is not, by the way, a conspiracy theory. There's all the Team Pixel bullshit. Google runs ad campaigns for freaking RCS. Nobody outside of the US even knows what RCS really is unless they're a hardcore tech enthusiast, because nobody bothers to run those ads here. Because guess why? Because people don't even rely that much on iMessage here in Europe. They do not do that in most parts of Asia either. Like, I know Japan and South Korea have like decently high iMessage adoption, but then China is like basically completely WeChat dependent, and then it's far from what I know from the Middle East. You also do like WhatsApp conversations with like your bosses and stuff like that. You can even send like resumes over WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is there also like an alternative almost to basic email, which by the way, it has not happened in the West at all, right? Whenever we talk about serious conversations, we usually still relegate them to mail. So yeah, this idea that like people talk about RCS a lot, nope, no bro, sorry.
I don't want to get too nerdy about it, but RCS would help bridge that technical.
Well, yeah, by the way, I am for the adoption of RCS. I'm just saying that Apple has enough to do in their freaking operating system than to adopt like a middleman thing that is mostly managed by Google, that does not support sending over like your regular, like, you know how SMS and stuff like basically, and regular phones don't require like a strong internet connection that way. RCS does. RCS in that way works exactly like iMessage. But when it comes to like a fallback, it's basically like an emergency service. That is still would be SMS. So now you would have 3 layers of decision between like, oh, does it have iMessage? Do I send RCS? Do I send an SMS? Given that we've had like years and years of potential security issues in the Messages app, I don't want anything else like just jammed right in. And when MMS was introduced, I believe Apple was like 2 years late in adopting it over a lot of other competitors with the iPhone. So yeah, I do believe that Apple will implement RCS, not to the least because I do believe that Europe will likely eventually force them, but I do not believe it will happen before iOS 18 in general. Quite honestly, I do see it being more of an iOS 19 thing, or more like an iOS 18.4 or something. You know what I'm saying?
As it stands right now, Apple doesn't have any need to change their product. In fact, they enjoy the advantage of having this special, fully featured thing that is part of the iOS ecosystem.
We actually have a lot.
An advantage, by the way, that Apple built completely from the on their own, right? iMessage was actually like really disliked by cellular carriers and stuff like that, because obviously they couldn't charge for it in the same way they could for SMS or MMS. But Apple was like making the argument, nope, people have like internet, they pay for internet. Your control, we've already fought it with the App Store. You do not control the distribution of apps or anything. So if you want to keep our insanely popular phone, you better not interfere with our ability to give people FaceTime connectivity or now iMessage connectivity. So Apple is actually a big reason for why we even have this super open chat landscape, because in a more dystopian world, we would have had like cellular carriers still like interfering with our chatting needs on phones. Again, not saying Apple is like the good guy here. We are all companies. They are all companies. I'm not a company, but they all have distinct profit-driven needs. Basically the must of satisfying their shareholders. And obviously they have to abide by laws, so at some point we might get like either RCS requirements, or we might even have like some kind of like intermingling between the actual services, where like you could send like a WhatsApp message inside Apple's default Messages app. some of European laws in that regard are absolutely brain dead, but so this appeal to like human connection, or now the competitiveness of the industry, it's all bullshit.
A lot of similar thoughts. We began working on a few projects that hopefully can level the playing field a little bit. First product that we're building is called Nothing Chat.
That's pretty exciting. So you're
Yeah, that sounded so excited.
blue bubbling, the green bubble.
Yeah, with the Nothing Phone 2, you can blue bubble and camouflage yourself. Yeah, so we were kind of frustrated because we saw in the data that a lot of our Nothing Ear users were actually iPhone users. So the majority of them are actually on iPhone.
Yeah, iPhone users tend to have higher revenue in general, so they are usually disproportionate users or buyers of pretty much anything, unless that thing is like highly Android specific at that point, right? And they marketed their earbuds as just general earbuds, so they did not have like disproportionately much higher appeal to Android users. So yeah, that makes sense.
Majority of our smartphone users do not come from iPhone. They come overwhelmingly from Android. So we were like, they like our design because they're
What? But that speaks against everything you've said.
So we were like, they like ours,
Wait.
so the majority of them are actually on iPhone.
Okay, so iPhone users don't hate your earbuds. Okay, that sounds fair. That sounds like a free open market where you're competing, and people who could be buying AirPods are buying yours because they maybe like the cool design, but they also like the obviously the cheaperness.
Majority of our smartphone users do not come from iPhone. They come overwhelmingly from Android.
Oh, so by the way, any myth of Nothing Phone substantially like taking either away from Apple's market share or even weakening it, that is now completely destroyed. What I'm trying to say here is like, so people switch to the Nothing Phone from other Android phones, which I assume are mostly cheaper to mid-range Android phones, like imagine like Samsung's A series, stuff like that, and they want something nicer but for around the same price range, which is where you could find a Nothing Phone. And those people switch to your phones, but that made you wonder why iPhone users are not converting? Have you considered that maybe iPhone users are happy with their device even if some of them buy your earbuds?
So we were like, they like our design because they're buying our earbuds, but they're not buying our phones.
No, your earbuds are like 30 to 40 to 50% cheaper than corresponding AirPods. A lot of people don't really like spending too much money on accessories, but they will happily spend a little more on the smartphone that they keep for 5 or 6 years these days often. So this idea that people are not, like, there are so many assumptions. Like, you could have done polls here. Like, come on, you're actually a big company. You have sold like 2 million phones.
Because maybe there's something else there. Maybe there's some other kind of barrier to switching. And then just speaking to friends, especially in the US, they talk a lot about iMessage. We're like, how can we do something about this? And we started looking at the different teams working on this problem, and we got in touch with the Sunbird team. We quickly...
By the way, like, you should see this, right? Because this is below my talking head. Nothing CEO reacts to iPhone 15 announcement saying boring in the thumbnail, and then you see the iPhone 15 Pro, a phone way better than any Nothing phone ever made, substantially so, and the Apple Watch Ultra, where Nothing has they have nothing to compete with at all in that segment. Like, yeah, you're the last one. Like, and you even put it on the YouTube channel of your company, not like the YouTube channel of this CEO specifically. Like, come on, have some fucking dignity in that regard.
Group together and came up with this kind of naughty idea that we're about to launch soon.
It is a little bit naughty.
By the way, I fully believe that they know that it will be blocked by Apple. like that they will have a cease and desist thing, and then maybe a lawsuit if they refuse to basically accept it, because Apple's argument is like no iMessage license. By the way, there probably does not exist an iMessage license in general, but there definitely is no iMessage license for Android in that way. So what you're doing is you're misusing our intellectual property to push your own product. That is highly, highly illegal.
Anybody else in our industry would do it.
Is it like at all like problematic? Like,
Yes.
are you gonna piss Apple off? That's
Yes.
what I'm asking.
Yes.
I'm working under the assumption that Tim Cook isn't going to watch this video.
No, believe me, Tim Cook will not give a fuck about this video. Tim Cook will listen to his lawyers, who will tell them we found stupid people that are trying to hijack one of our highly successful services. Tim, do you want us to destroy them with lightning or with fire? Like, this is what Tim Cook will hear. Not watch this. I'm watching this because I'm irrelevant. Tim Cook isn't.
Video, but we don't have to include this part. And he won't be happy with it. He will be forwarding it to people within the company.
And it's Sunbird.
This is so, like, I know he's like obviously saying what could happen, but like, does he believe really that Tim Cook will find this video first? Like, is he really that delusional? Jesus Christ.
Right?
Yeah, we work with the team at Sunbird behind the scenes. They run the technology and we design the app. It'll be really exciting to see the reaction that users have.
Is it just converting a green bubble to a blue bubble, or do you get full access to all of the other iMessage features that we talked about?
It's not just about messaging, but other iMessage features will also be available, such as group chats.
Okay, that is just chats in a different live typing indicator, so that's full rest media share. That is pretty much RCS standard stuff, right? No read receipts, message reactions and replies, which, yeah, by the way, this is the one part that I believe is 100% broken if you actually interact with somebody over SMS. So I can see people being pissed off at that. I think all the other stuff is like, you should just get another messaging service whatsoever for that anyway. But like when it comes to message reactions, right, they're pretty broken. The fact that you can like send something broken, no editing, no pulling message back. Yeah, no editing, no deletes, no Apple Pay. I'll just open, by the way, the iMessage app. What else can I do here? They do not say if it has like rich link previews, but I highly assume it should have that. No native integration for location sharing. Obviously, when we're looking at iOS 17, no stickers in that regard, like no default integration with like your system-wide shared stickers. Let me just go to the message part of settings. I don't know how that handles like the fact that obviously with iMessage you can have multiple addresses like between emails and phones. Previews when it comes to the new contacts with like share name and photo stuff. Shared with you integration, but obviously since that would work on Android, that does not need that. Block contacts. Probably would have to rely on whatever contacts are blocked in your overall Android settings. Keep message settings. Yeah, that does not need too much extra stuff. Yeah, so definitely some stuff missing. No app integration from third parties. The one thing I wouldn't even really expect. But then there's also stuff that is like not third party, right? Like your location services integration when it comes to how it works on iOS. And then obviously Apple Pay Cash if you are in the US. So yeah, this is like read receipts coming soon. Should be a dead giveaway that this is like Video calls, I assume not. Like, unless they baked like some other video messenger into it, they're not saying that they have like found a way to like hijack FaceTime. Even though FaceTime is inarguably currently more open than iMessage, because you could like you can send a FaceTime join link to an Android phone.
High-res media sharing, and also live typing. We also have other features coming out soon. There's no data saved on the platform. It's all local on your device, so your users don't have to worry about the privacy. Exciting to see.
So, but how does it work? What do you integrate with? Why would an iPhone recognize it as iMessage? Because if you are replicating basically an iMessage signal from your device, you have no right to do so. And since there's no RCS on iOS, there is no other way for you to do that. So this feature, correct me guys if I'm wrong, there's zero way to do that without stealing intellectual property from Apple, even if it's like a few lines of identifier code that makes your message look like an iMessage. Or am I wrong here?
People are going to react to this once we release it.
What about knowing when someone's typing?
Yeah, it's supported actually. Would you say that those are some of the main things? Because personally, I didn't really understand why seeing when somebody is typing is important, because I'm not going to sit there and wait for them to finish the sentence and then press send.
That sounds like a you thing, Carl.
Yeah, like it's an important thing for introverts to know when somebody starts typing. I'm not too much of an introvert myself, but I like to keep mostly private. So I do have some tics from introverts, from being somewhat introvertish, I guess. But I guess the most important part where I do like to see like live typing, not even previews, but indicators, is when you're in a relationship. Then you really sometimes want to know, oh, is she typing or is he typing or are they typing? We're fully inclusive on this channel. I've said it time and time again. And sometimes, obviously, if you have a more serious conversation, that can also be like a good sign to know, should I respond now, or is the other person still like trying to convey something, right?
Usually if I see like a little, like the bubble come up, then I wait. That's huge for me.
True. That's true.
Well, like if you're having a conversation with someone, right? There's like body language. So I think they're huge, personally.
It will also support group messaging. I get that, you know, I don't want to be the guy in the group, only one having green bubbles when everybody else is blue. So I get that social dynamic more so than the typing thing.
Wait, aren't like the bubble? Okay, why are you not showing how it would look on an iPhone? You're still showing it in this app.
It's a bit of a stigma. It's a little alienating, I think.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, James. It was fun. Yeah, hope to see you around soon.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. It was a great talk. Thanks for inviting me.
So now you might be asking, why is Nothing doing a video like this? Why is Nothing building Nothing chats? Well, for those of you who remember, our vision is to make tech fun again, and tech has become really boring recently, but...
By the way, their vision of making things fun again is barely distinguishable. It's this, but transparent when it comes to earpods. By the way, every single other thing looks like AirPods, which I assume are this one. It's because they steal from Apple's design, not because Apple created something boring. And then Nothing takes that and makes it translucent and claims that they have like the best design ever. Then they built like a phone that looks and feels like basically every other Android phone, but they put some LED lights in the back. And then they claim that this is somehow a big thing. This is the most pretentious company right now. At least Samsung had like distinct differences versus Apple that they try to advertise. This is literally a company advertising that they are worse but more fun. I think they created their app with shoes Bobby is blue. This is more like freaking marketing shit. Yeah, like I am still like, yeah, I wonder like how much they actually believe in the success of this app or anything. I wonder if it just exists to like to maybe piss Apple off, force a standoff, and then they look like the good guy, they get some free publicity, but they've actually contributed nothing of value. They could be instead like working on actual improvements to RCS. Hell, they could be lobbying government officials to force RCS implementation. This is like, well, Huawei steals a lot from Apple, right? But let's be perfectly clear here. Huawei has distinct own technologies, whether it's like making stuff directly or like working very deeply with like other Chinese companies like BOE to get certain technologies. Huawei, as much as I shit on them sometimes, had innovations over the last couple of years before they went offline, basically, at least for the most part in the West. And now they're seeing a small resurgence in China because guess what? They kept on working on themselves and they kept on working on their identity as a mostly Chinese company with Chinese-derived intellectual property. There are some other problems with how China treats intellectual property in general, but this is a different discussion for a different day. Like Xiaomi, for example, I also have my problems with how MIUI, or now HyperOS, certainly take inspiration in certain aspects from a certain market leader. And I actually wanted to really like nothing in the way that, oh look, their dotted design, it's not like it's like a meaningful innovation in the industry, but it's something new, right? And I do like translucent. Hey, I'm an Apple fan. I do love me some translucent tech. Who doesn't love a Bondi blue iMac, right, with a translucent back? But then nothing started pretending like they're so high and mighty, like so far above like cheap clones, which is like, yeah, you better be. Cheap clone companies don't either last long or they have a terrible perception among people. The fact that you are though trying to make it look as if you're somehow already more interesting than Apple, like, look, with Samsung makes their own screens. Samsung has their own semiconductor factories. Samsung makes like even their own modems. A lot of that stuff is not top tier. Their screens aren't. They do have their own NAND storage. They do have their own RAM, even though I would argue a lot of that comes from mismanagement by South Korea, with the fact that Samsung is basically run as a giant conglomerate that would be absolutely illegal in the West. But you could say that Samsung controls a lot of like vertical integration for their own products. And then even like One UI over the years has seen a ton of changes and a ton of meaningful improvements, a ton of exclusive features, even collaboration with like third-party apps when it comes to getting features that might have previously only been on iPhone, or features that are exclusively completely. Nothing has done nothing in that regard. They've had like they have their own Android skin, and they have a couple of translucent accessories that are decent, by the way. I'm not downplaying their own like hardware or software efforts, but like, where do you get off on claiming that this is boring, right? Sorry, my iPad just ate my cursor again. But somehow AirPods are because others copied it, are bad, right? Jesus, I have no idea how people can get so high and mighty. This is like I can criticize Elon, but Elon is freaking rich, and Tesla is a mostly successful company, and SpaceX has very impressive engineering. Now, the Hyperloop thing is bullshit. The flamethrowers are nothing but like, there's nothing there. Teslas have many problems, and their margins as a company are shrinking like crazy, so they're not the new Apple in any way. SpaceX arguably should have been just the continuation of NASA. It should have never been allowed to be as private, because all the engineers there are basically just prior NASA engineers. That's neither here nor there. At least Elon is fucking rich and successful in many ways. Where this guy gets off on making content like this is absolutely unbelievable to me.
the more companies lock things in, the harder it is for us to compete, the harder it is for us to build more of these new and innovative.
But you are literally just running Android. Like, in what world it does end? Like, the actual world for the delusional people who believe this actually is the reversal of this. Now, for one, in the US, iPhone is maybe like 55% market share, so that would be like those 9 apples plus maybe one here, maybe 2, right? The rest of the world actually looks like this, but in reverse, like basically giving us like 17 Androids. No, let's not be like that negative towards Apple, but like, let's say here you have 18, you would have like 14 Androids versus 4 iPhones or something like that. Depending on the exact cycle in the year, it might be lower or higher. So this idea that Apple like 8 Androids launch because of iMessage is so freaking dishonest. Pretending that you as, like, yeah, I admit, if you as a company come in, like ask Microsoft, and want to provide us an alternative operating system to those two, you're very likely to hit roadblocks and bottlenecks based on exclusive functionality that both operating systems have, by the way. You also would have meaningful problems to get third-party support, at least unless you like fully copied like Android's more open solutions, right? And then people were able to just port Android apps to your platform without pretty much any coding. At that point, you're not contributing meaningful to competition whatsoever. You're just stealing shit, or you're borrowing stuff. But like, yeah, this is bullshit. So much of this video is bullshit.
Experiences.
Oh, yeah, iPhone, yeah, completely ate up Android. I'm pretty sure that the 82% to 18% worldwide market share absolutely bears out the fact that Apple has 100% market share in your diagram.
The world is this video. Is nothing chat's gonna change the status quo and open everything up. No, but I think it's very important that we start this conversation. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Peace.
Yeah, fuck you. I think I'm mostly done here. I've done like it's almost 2.5 hours. I really enjoyed this. I'm happy we had more people watching. Obviously, as the channel is hitting over 50,000 subscribers, I hope that we can fill every single live stream in the future, but I know most of you still enjoy watching my videos afterwards and not live. That is also perfectly fine, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that my live streams are open to you. I love interacting with you, and I love being a little bit more hilarious in my live streams than I do my pre-recorded videos. My last point here is amazing work from Max Tech on their review or breakdown of the M3 Max processor versus M2 Max versus M1 Max. If there is other more meaningful data down the road, maybe like an Antec review, I would like to do that, to cover that as well. Not so great work from Nothing, not focusing on the things that actually matter, but what else would you expect after the last 2 years on the market and how they behave and how they claim to be both victims but also the ultimate solution? So yeah, again, thank you so much for the incredible growth of this channel. If you're watching this and you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Please consider liking, sharing, and doing all the YouTube jazz, as I call it. And if you want to support this channel directly, because maybe you find this content really that awesome, you can find the link to my Patreon account in the description of this channel. Or while you're watching live, you can send a super chat or a super sticker. If you want to give me a little gift, maybe post my birthday and you feel like that, or if a video has already been processed and it's live, it's basically it's there's what you could still send super thanks, I believe it's called. I apologize if that sometimes is obviously a little buzz killing whenever I go into that tirade of all the YouTube stuff, but I really need to mention it. Please also hit the notification bell so you actually know when I'm going live next. This is unfortunately the nature of YouTube and the nature of being a small content creator that does need some of your extra support if I want to keep doing this to the extent that I do. But obviously, with the incredible growth of this channel, I am so freaking humble. Thank you so much. A big shout out to India, Indonesia, Egypt, Nepal, and Bangladesh, my top 5 markets currently in the last week. So I really wanted to give you a nice big shout out. We are really a freaking international channel, growing quickly. I don't know how quickly we'll keep growing for the next couple of weeks or months now that the M3 discussions are mostly dead, basically, or at least a little bit more subdued. But hey, whenever there is an Apple event and something like that, we definitely capitalize on that. You know, I'll make sure of that. Yeah, without further ado, without holding you up any further, last thank you. I hope to catch you in the next one. Please let me know what you thought of this content. Please consider doing any of the aforementioned things when it comes to supporting this channel. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.